Ladies and gentlemen, welcome the author of The Glass Castle, Jeanette Walls.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, welcome to the Smith-Raffel Film Center.
Thank you.
It's such a beautiful, beautiful film, and of course, coming from just a lovely, lovely book. So thank you for sharing your story with all of us. And,
Thank you.
I think it's appropriate to say that on this stage in the last few years was Woody Harrelson and Brie Larson.
Yeah.
So we're rounding out the whole creative cast here. Yeah. So thank you again for coming. I was just wondering, because you so courageous and talented when you wrote this book, and it was published in 2005.
That's correct.
And all the surrounding elements to get you to that point. And now here we are 12 years later, and it's a movie, and it's an adaptation, and it's such a personal, emotional, complicated story, beautiful story, but you really had to let it go for this adaptation. Was that difficult for you?
Well, it was... Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you all so very much. It's a joy to be here. Thank you. It's such an honor. When I sat down to tell my story, I didn't think anybody would get it. I thought it was just too weird and too creepy, and the degree to which anybody read it, I would be held in contempt and ridicule. I did not expect it to hit. And I was ashamed of my past, and now this past that I was so ashamed of is a movie that I'm so proud of. And it was hard letting go. It was really, I tried a couple of times to write my story when I was younger, and I just threw a couple hundred pages, I'd write a couple hundred pages and throw it away, and it was my mother saying, just tell the truth, that made me sit down and try to tell it. And I never thought it would get made into a movie. Somebody said, this must be a dream come true for you. I would have to be insane to dream that an Academy Award-winning actress would play me in a major motion picture and that Woody Harrelson would be my dad. I'd have to be insane. But so as soon as the book came out, it got optioned. And I was like, great. And people said, well, we're gonna have to Hollywoodize it. I said, do whatever you want as long as it gets made into a movie. And then a couple of people worked on scripts, and they were kind of, maybe I don't want anything done. It was sort of like, I was so eager for it to be made into a movie, then, I don't want my parents to be a punchline. At least not somebody else's punchline. And so it was sort of like, I got sort of kind of proprietary about it, but plus everybody was saying, we cannot turn this book into a movie. It's just too complex. We've got to Hollywoodize it. And it just went through a bunch of producers and a bunch of screenwriters. And then about 5 years ago, this amazing man named Gil Nett, a producer, got his hands on it. And this is a man who will not take no for an answer. And he did so many brilliant things, but the most brilliant thing he did was to hire the director, Destin Daniel Cretton, who made what I now call the second best movie ever, which was a Short Term 12. And it was about foster care system. And I watched it and was just flabbergasted by how he managed to make a movie that was filled with joy and pain and despair and redemption. And I thought, this is the man. And my older sister was kind of ambivalent about the idea of it getting turned into a movie. And she watched Short Term 12. She called up my mother and she said, our story is in good hands. And at that point, I kind of let it go. I'm not a movie maker. I'm not a script writer. It was the perfect relationship where I trusted this man. I got into a couple of arguments with him. He always won because he was always right. As soon as he explained his reasoning, I was like, oh, you're right. They contacted me constantly about changes that they wanted to make to the book, going off the script, collapsing a few scenes, expanding a few scenes. It was always in consultation with me, so I just felt very safe with him.
I'm wondering, how many people have read the book?
Oh my goodness. That's fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the greatest books that were made into great movies have always never been literal translation, so to speak.
Some very good books get made into not very good movies, and vice versa.
Yeah,
and I didn't know what was going to happen with this, and I spent a lot of time on the set, and so I had some idea that they weren't going to mangle it, but I saw the script, and it was the actors as well would contact me constantly, or the people who they were playing. And there was an incredible passion about authenticity. They just want to, what do you think was going on here? We're thinking of doing this. How would you feel about this? So I trusted them, but at the same time, the book is so complicated, they had to leave something out. And a number of the screenwriters who looked at it previously focused on other things. But Destin, who was not only the director, he was one of the screenwriters, he immediately seized on the relationship between the father and the daughter. He felt that was the heart of the book and carved away a lot of other things. And he told me about his decisions. I want to do this scene, I want to do this scene. He had to let some of them fall by the wayside. They filmed over an hour, the final, well, not the final, but a rough cut was 3 hours long, so we had to delete certain scenes. And when he told me he was deleting one of the scenes, oh, Destin, that's the best scene ever. How could you cut that over? And he explained to me his reasoning, and I realized, oh, he's right. He's right.
Well, if they took every great chapter from the book, it would have been like 5 hours.
Well, that's a possibility, but.
But the other really difficult thing, and I'm sure many in the audience have heard me say this before, but for me the most important thing of a film is that whatever the character or characters are, that they resonate in an empathetic and in a universal way.
Exactly.
And in your book, you balanced and were so non-judgmental, the good and the bad on this, and it became relatable. I'm sure people must stop you all the time and tell you that, whether it wasn't the same story, obviously, and
right.
But that there were things that really they found universal, and this movie does that as well.
Well, that makes me overjoyed to hear that you feel that way, because to me that's why we tell our stories. We're not exhibitionists. We're not out there looking to try to get pity or to get glory. We're just saying, this is my life, and maybe you can learn something from it without the nasty business of going through it. And maybe if we're lucky, we can connect on some sort of emotional level. You will recognize something of yourself in my story, and then these bonds are created, and it's kind of magical. Because after having told my story, I talk sometimes on behalf of it, and afterwards I'm signing, and there'll be somebody standing in line, and she's all Neiman Marcused out, and I think, some rich person, she has nothing in common with me. She'll come and say, girlfriend, you and I could be sisters. She'll say, my daddy was a truck driver, my mom was a cocktail waitress, and one day daddy went out for cigarettes and didn't come back. And said, and you're looking at 12 perfect carats here. And it's kind of magical, because until I told my story, I would have thought, we have nothing in common. But the number of people who've come up to me and said, the details of our lives are very different, but you and I have something in common. And then they start telling me things about themselves. And it's this incredible gift that people feel safe with me. And that's the magic of storytelling. And I believe this movie does that as well. It's just like, people have come to me who haven't read the book and said, my father was an alcoholic. I've never told anybody this before. And that's kind of spectacular, because I think that sometimes we think we're protecting ourselves. We erect these barriers. We think we're protecting ourselves, but all we do is isolate ourselves. And through storytelling, we take down the barriers and we make these connections by what we have in common, and we learn from one another.
Yeah, and if you could spare 5 minutes for me later. I would be remiss if I didn't ask about the process that you went through with these incredible cast members. And I mean, there's 3 Jeanettes, and there's 3 Lauries, and 3 Ryans, et cetera. But just starting with Brie and yourself, what was that like? I mean, I've heard her say that, it's such a blessing to have this main subject available, but it's also a great responsibility. What was the process like?
And that's why I love and admire her. She understood that I was a resource, but it was also a responsibility. And every one of those actors was just so sensitive about not violating anybody's humanity or dignity. They were never interested in making us into characters. They really were interested in getting in deep. And I was prepared, and I'll come clean on this. I thought that Hollywood would be kind of shallow and superficial and all these people. And shut me up, because they blew me away with their emotional intelligence and their sensitivity about character. They weren't looking to make fun of anybody. Who is this person? And they keenly understood the light and the dark. And Brie introduced herself by writing a magnificent letter to me about, that if, asking if she could turn to me, wondering, if there's anything that I didn't want her to do. They were just so sensitive to this sort of thing. I was blown away. I talked to her a couple of times. It was sort of funny because she said, "Do you have any tells?" I didn't know what a tell is, and she said, "Do you have any, physical habits?" No, I don't know what you're talking about. And she and the other actors, they all got to the three Jeanettes, as we call them. They all started doing this to create some continuity. And I'm watching her on the set one day, and she stands up and throws her purse over her shoulder and starts walking away. I was like, that's kind of funny the way she does that. Oh, I guess I do that too. So this woman, she picked up on things that I don't know about myself. She listened to all these tapes of me, and she said, "You have 5 different ways of saying like." And she knew the circumstances under which I said like in 5 different ways. She said, "You slip into a West Virginia accent when you make fun of yourself." I got a tin ear. I don't hear this stuff. But it was like being analyzed by this incredibly wise and sensitive and perceptive person. These actors, these good actors, and everybody on the set was a good actor, but they've got extra nerve endings, and they just see things and feel things that, flinty gals like me I don't pick up on these things. So it was humbling as an author who likes to think of myself as perceptive. Wow. They were smart. And Ella Anderson as the middle me, how about her? Was that amazing? Oh my gosh. I talked to her about, how did you know? How could a 10 or 11-year-old know all of these things? And it's kind of weird and beautiful and mystical because Ella Anderson was born on the month and year that The Glass Castle was published. So we're both kind of convinced that some hand of fate reached in and delayed the filming of the book until she was old enough to star as me. So, it was, I just thought that performance, but it wasn't just her. I mean, and I hate to say the bit parts because there is no such thing as a bit part. Everybody was amazing. Little Chandler Head she was amazing as well. And these kids were all running around the set, and they were all redheaded, and they were all running around Montreal, and everybody thought it was this weird family of redheads, But they bonded, and that was part of the whole process. These kids all went to an Expos game together. They went to the park together. Naomi Watts was fabulous. She treated them all like her children, and they felt kind of safe. And the astonishing set director, she made this old shack of recreating 93 Little Hobart Street, and she said it was run down, it was sort of ratty, but your mother was an artist, and it was also beautiful. She visited my mother's cottage in Virginia and took pictures, and she said she noticed she's a hoarder, which I didn't know when I was growing up because our houses were always burning down. But now that she's actually lived in one place for a long time, it's filled up with junk. And one time I was trying to clean it out. Mom, you can't keep all this junk, and I'm throwing it out like, oh, this piece is actually kind of nice. But artists are often like that. They find everything beautiful, and they keep these things. And Sharon Seymour, who did the set, immediately picked up on her. And so did Destin. They just loved Mom. And so they went to great lengths to treat her with sensitivity. And they both pointed out that a male artist who ignored his children would not be judged quite as harshly as Mom was. And they both loved her and got her. They created this house, this 93 Little Hobart Street. And like I said, it was kind of a shack, but all the kids loved living there. And a couple of them said, I want to live here forever. It was very much like a family, and the kids felt safe. And that's one of the ways that Destin got these astonishing performances out of them, is that they felt like a family.
So did Naomi had some time to spend with your mom?
Yes, she did. My mom originally, she wasn't going to cooperate with the movie because I think she was afraid that she was going to be the villain of it. And when Destin came to Virginia, where I live now, he saw these. He opened up one of Mom's sheds, and there's about 500 paintings there. And he had planned on, having her paintings recreated, but he decided, why recreate them if the real thing is here? So those were Mom's paintings in the movie. And at first, Mom wasn't going to lend them to him. She's like, no, I don't want my paintings to upstage your story, And I knew that was one of Mom's reasons. That's a typical Mom's explanation to not want to cooperate. So she called up. So I said, they're going to cast Naomi Watts as you, Mom. So she calls up my older sister, Lori. Who is this Naomi Watts character anyway? And Lori says, she's very beautiful and she's very talented. Suddenly, Mom's on board, And so Naomi Watts is calling Mom, and they talk, and And Mom was going around telling all of her friends at the Senior Citizen Center, yes, my actress has been speaking with me to perfect my voice. She was very much into it. And when she saw the trailer, I was a little bit nervous what she would think about it, but she was over the moon. She saw it, oh, that looks just like Rex. That looks just like one of our cars. And then she says, Naomi Watts, oh my gosh, she looks just like me. So Mom is happy.
Well, she was beautiful. She is beautiful.
She's very talented and a very kind and decent human being.
Shall we open it up for questions from the audience? See what they have to say and ask? Yes, right here.
Thank you. The question is how my siblings are. I'm sorry. And was the David character all fictional? My older sister is still living in Manhattan. She's still an artist. My kid sister is living on the West Coast. She's okay. She's not great, but she's okay. My brother has retired from the police force, no longer the Gestapo, and he works for Habitat for Humanity. He's great. He's the best. The David character, Destin called me on a regular basis and discussed my previous marriage. And we expanded on that. It is not all fictional. It is very, there's some tinkering in a way that I, as a memoirist, might not have been entirely comfortable doing, but it is very true to the essence of my first marriage, yes. The question is, there was a lot of forgiveness, and was there any sort of spiritual practice I engage in? Well, first of all, thank you. Secondly, I do appreciate the concept of forgiveness, but I don't think that's quite the right word in my case. It's not forgiveness, it's acceptance. If you say forgiveness, that casts me as a victim, and I just don't see it that way. How do you forgive somebody for being damaged? My father was an alcoholic, and my mom's loopy. She can't take care of herself. How could she take care of me? And for me to say, I forgive you for being weird. It's just like, this is who she is, and I believe she gave me great gifts. People are free to disagree, as some of my siblings do. I choose, and it's a choice, and I choose to focus on the good. My brother says that one of the big differences between me and him is that if there's a train crash, he would focus on the fatalities, and I would focus on the survivors. And both are accurate, but neither is completely true. And so that's one of the challenges we have in telling the truth, is to look at the whole big picture and not just focus on what we are inclined to focus on. So far as spirituality, I consider myself to be a very spiritual person, but my therapy, such as it was telling my story. And that is what all therapy is. When you go to a therapist, they get your story and they force you to be honest about it. And so the first version I wrote of The Glass Castle, which I wrote in 6 weeks, was very bad because I did not go deep enough. I'd written it as though it happened to somebody else. I had heretofore not considered the plethora of influences. And my agent read it and she said, you wrote this as though it happened to somebody else. You have to describe how it affected you. It didn't affect me at all. I'm perfectly normal. Nothing bothered me at all. And the truth is, when I read it back the first time, I was kind of shocked. And so my therapy was just going back and really trying to be honest about these things. What really happened? How did I really feel about it? And there's something that really magical that happens in storytelling. A very wise man once said to me, secrets are a little bit like vampires. They suck the life out of you, but they can exist only in the darkness. Once they're exposed to light, there's a moment of horror, but then poof, they lose their power over you. And I found that to be very true. It's these things that happened to me that I thought made me less of a person. You put it down on paper and confront it. It's just something you went through. It shapes you, but it doesn't control you. And I thought I'd completely come to terms with it, but then I watched the movie and I watched the filming of the movie, and there were a couple of points at which, when I was on set, I lost it. So I obviously have not completely come to terms with things. The first time I saw Woody Harrelson in character, I was trembling and I was shaking. I did not expect him to, I thought, Woody Harrelson, of course he's going to be good. He's Woody Harrelson. We all love Woody. How could you not like him? I was not prepared for that. He blew me away because I talked to him a number of times about Dad. It was funny. I was all prepared to have these sort of ornate descriptions of my father's motivations, and on the Briggs-Meyer test, he would probably be, type whatever, blah, blah, blah. And Woody asked me, he said, did he look you in the eye when he talked to you? And what did he do with his hands? And they just wanted this physical stuff because they so intensely understand the relationship between the physical and the emotional. But, he was working really hard at it. He had a tape on it. I thought he'd get him pretty good. And then the first time I saw him, it was like, oh my God, oh my God. And he nailed it. And the first take they did, it was on script. And then they went off script. And Woody was saying things that my father had said that I had not told Woody about. That was how purely he understood it. And Destin told me on a number of occasions, what he would say, I don't think Rex would do it that way. I think he'd do this. And, so they all of these actors were really into the character. And it just, with this great sensitivity, bordering on reverence without ever whitewashing. They just wanted to get it right. And I thought they did.
Yeah, I think they did too. Don't you? Any questions from the back here? Yes, right over here.
Did my siblings agree with how I remembered my childhood? They do not dispute a single fact. Well, there's one thing that my sister said would happen in Battle Mountain that I put in Blythe, but other than that, they do not dispute a single fact. Their perception is very different. One of the things that I like to tell is that my very favorite memory from my entire childhood was when Dad gave me a star turned out to be a planet for Christmas. To this day, when I see Venus up in the sky, I think, that is mine, honey. I own that. I love that gift so much. I love that story so much. I told it at my father's funeral. After I finished telling that story, my sister Lori folds her arms and said, "Isn't that like that sorry SOB dad of ours to go give away something that doesn't belong to him in the first place?" And I thought about that comment a whole lot while I was writing my story, because Lori's absolutely right. Dad's giving me Venus was a completely meaningless gesture. But I'm right too. It was a priceless treasure. So in telling our stories, even though it's nonfiction, we shape our truths by which stories we tell and how we choose to tell them. So I could have made Mom and Dad a lot worse. I could have made them a lot better. And it's a choice that we make, not only in writing our stories, but in living our life. What do we choose to focus on? Is our life a tragedy or a comedy? It all depends on how you choose to tell it.
And when I saw that scene, yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. It kind of represented the complexity of your dad, too.
I completely agree. Yeah.
Okay, other questions here? Is there over there? Yes.
There was some truth to it. That came from conversations with Destin, where people would ask me about that sort of thing, and I just sort of said, my first husband, I've got to be kind of careful in this, but my first husband actively encouraged me to lie about my past. But that was my fault. I was the one who prompted him, and he kind of encouraged it. And then I was just out at dinner one time, and I don't want to do this anymore. I did not then run out of the restaurant to my father, but that was a liberty that he took. But there was an episode in which, I really liked the people, and I'm sitting there lying, and I got tired of lying.
On the other hand, I noticed in your book there was a dedication. It says, "To John for convincing me that everyone who is interesting has a past."
Yeah, that's my second husband. I got it right the second time. My second husband, my first husband, again, I'm not blaming anybody. It was my choice. It was my decision. But he was a decent man. He was the anti-Rex. I married somebody who would never make me write a bad check, who would never, take the rent money to buy beer. I trusted him. He never once hit me. I mean, what more could you ask for, right? And so, but my brother said, "You're describing a good accountant, Jeanette." My second husband, he was really the person who pulled the book out of me. He admitted the first time I told him about my parents and my family, he thought I was exaggerating. And then he met my mom, and he said, "Oh, this is really complicated, but you must tell this story."
Turned out well.
Yeah, not bad.
Additional questions? Yes. In the back.
Is your second husband a current husband?
How did I find the courage to tell my story? Part of it was mom challenging me or giving me permission to just tell the truth. I tried and just couldn't do it. But it was my second husband who just said, he contacted our agent. We share an agent. And he said, "Jeanette's got an amazing story." He said, yeah, her and everybody else, tell her to write it down. And he got an advance, and I at one point I said, "I can't live with this being out. We've got to return the advance. This is just too embarrassing." He said, "Too late. We've already spent it," which was a lie. But he also forced me to be honest. He'd look at it and say, you're not coming clean. You've got to, what really happened here. And one of the many lessons I think I've learned is like, we all have these things about our past that we don't love. And if anybody here is thinking of writing your own story, and there's something that you cannot imagine putting down on paper on the computer because it's just too horrible and too awful, you must tell it because it's pivotal. It's pivotal, and if you decide you want to write your story, you can always take it out. You can fictionalize it. But one of the things that I found out is we all have pieces of the puzzle floating around in our head, and we don't know what we know. The first time I read back my own story, I was a little shocked. I'm like, dang, I thought this was going to be a little lighter than it is, But then I kept on rewriting, and it was, like I said, the most cathartic thing I've ever done. So if anybody's thinking of writing your story, I cannot recommend it highly enough, even if you choose not to share it with anybody. But it was also the most excruciating thing I've ever done. I spent 5 years just tortured about it. But I believe that the truth will set you free, but the truth, it's not easy to get at. It's challenging. Part of the big challenge is finding your voice.
Yes, over here.
Was the title obvious to me? I always thought I wanted to call it The Glass Castle. My publisher hated it. And I'm no good with titles. Some people have the title before they have the book. And so I was thinking, something about Venus, the gift of Venus or something like that, but it sounded sort of vaguely pornographic or so, And then I was like, demon hunting, or, but that sounded like some sort of vampire book or something. And I just couldn't think of anything good. So we went back to Glass Castle. Everybody hated it, but I kind of liked it. It's old-fashioned, but I'm an old-fashioned kind of person.
We have time for one more question. Okay, you're the loudest.
Oh, I'm working on another book. I don't have any idea whether it's any good or not. I hate writing, and I keep on saying I'm not going to do it anymore. It's horrible. I hate it. Why do I do this to myself? But it's like a disease you don't get rid of, And it's like, and I think I'm going to be okay, and then the hand keeps on going, just like typing on its own. So I'm working on another book. I'm banging the drum for this movie right now, obviously, but it's just, I live in the sticks. I'm complete hillbilly. I returned to being mountain goat again.
Well, Mountain Goat, if I can be so bold to call you that. When does the film open?
August 11.
August 11th. Mm-hmm. Well, just thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
In so many different ways.
Thank you.
Here with us
Thank you
tonight.
so very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.